The Middle Ages, a time of kings, castles, knights in shining armor, right? But let me ask you this. What if I told you the real action wasn't always happening in the royal courts or on the grand battlefields, but in the shadows, among men who fought not for loyalty or honor, but for cold, hard cash? Yeah, that's right. Today, we're talking about mercenaries. Let's win the clock back to around the 12th century. The Crusades are in full swing, kingdoms are rising and falling, and knights are setting off on grand adventures. But here's the kicker. Not every man wielding a sword in these battles had some noble purpose. Some were, quite literally, soldiers for hire. They didn't care which king paid them, or whether they fought for God or country. As long as they got paid, they'd go anywhere, fight anyone, and spill any amount of blood. You see, by the 12th century, warfare had become so constant, so relentless, that even kings couldn't keep up with the demand for soldiers. And this is where the mercenaries come into play. You've got armies that need bolstering. Some unscrupulous lords need a little extra muscle. And what better solution than a band of hardened fighters ready to risk it all for a price? The problem? Some of these mercenaries were downright terrifying. They were often former soldiers, outlaws, or disinherited nobles. Guys who didn't have a land to call home and who needed to eat. They were gritty, brutal, and efficient. If you had enough gold, you had their loyalty for a time. One of the earliest and most notorious examples were the Routiers in France and England. Ever heard of them? Probably not. These guys were ruthless, bands of soldiers who lived by raiding, pillaging, and looting. You could hire them if you needed an edge in a battle, but once the fighting stopped, you'd better pay up quick, or they'd turn on you faster than you could say chivalry. They had no qualms about looting towns, capturing nobles for ransom, or torching villages. Even their employers were often afraid of them. But mercenaries weren't just a ragtag group of thieves. Some of them became highly organized and influential in shaping medieval warfare. Let's talk about the Burbans. From the region of Brabant, these were professional mercenaries for hire across Europe. They were so formidable that many feared their growing influence. These guys fought in the wars between the French and English, the Holy Roman Empire, and even in the Reconquista against the Moors in Spain. They made their mark by developing specialized siege techniques, breaking into cities and fortresses that were thought impenetrable. But the real masters of the mercenary game? Enter the Italians and their Condottieri. These guys were on another level. Picture it, Renaissance Italy, a landscape of warring city-states like Florence, Venice, and Milan. Everyone was battling for control, but no one wanted the constant hassle of managing a permanent army. So, what do? You hire a condottiero, a commander of mercenary troops who sold their services to the highest bidder. They were smooth, political, and incredibly strategic. Unlike the more chaotic routiers, condottieri didn't just charge into battle like bloodthirsty wolves. They played the long game, deals, betrayals, alliances. One of the most famous condottieri, Sir John Hawkwood, was an Englishman who made his name in Italy. He didn't care who he fought for, Florence, Milan, or even the Pope, just so long as the money kept flowing. His name became legendary, not just for his skill on the battlefield, but for his ability to navigate the dangerous waters of politics. You know that saying, the pen is mightier than the sword? Well, the condottieri understood that, but also knew that having a well-paid sword at your side didn't hurt either. Now, here's the wild part. Mercenaries didn't always stay mercenaries. Some of them amassed enough wealth and power to become lords and rulers themselves. Take Francesco Sforza, a condottiero who fought for Milan and then ended up ruling it as the Duke. A guy who started as a mercenary now calling the shots over an entire city-state. But it wasn't all glory and power. The downside of mercenaries was they were notoriously fickle. No gold? No problem, we'll just switch sides. And switch they did, sometimes in the middle of battle. Imagine that. You're a king in the heat of war, and suddenly, half your army just turns around and fights for the other side. It happened more than once. And let's not forget the damage mercenaries did when wars ended. A bunch of heavily armed soldiers with no battles to fight and no money? It often led to roving bands of mercenaries terrorizing the countryside. They'd turn from hired muscle to full-on bandits. So why did rulers keep hiring them? Why didn't they just build bigger armies? Simple: convenience and cost. Mercenaries were quick, efficient, and you didn't have to house and feed them long term. If they died, well, no big deal. It wasn't your problem. But as you can imagine, the consequences were often devastating. So, next time you think of the Middle Ages, remember, it wasn't just about knights and nobility. The mercenaries, those shadowy soldiers for hire, played a huge role in shaping history. From the Routiers terrorizing villages to the Condottieri becoming rulers, these men lived and died by the coin. And their legacy? It's one that still haunts the corridors of history. And hey, if you're ever in a tight spot, you might just want a mercenary by your side.